Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, ça marche. Well, mesdames et messieurs, merci. I promised that my speech tonight would be no longer than 45 minutes, just for one copy of the speech. The problem is to make sure that there are not two copies of the speech. Well, thank you very much. You can applaud me right now. Thank you very much for this very spontaneous reaction. No, now seriously, usually we have Kevin Rudd, you know, the former Prime Minister of Australia, who is now Ambassador of Australia to the US. And he is one of the most respected experts on China. This is why sometimes in person, sometimes in online, he speaks a little bit about China. So this year, unfortunately, so he's in Washington, but unfortunately, we cannot have a direct discussion because at this precise moment, he has an important appointment. Nevertheless, I asked him to say a few words, so now I am serious, no more than 8 minutes, I think, to tell us some of his key reflections on China. Maybe Zhao Yide can commence tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock in the morning. Before the opening, the session tomorrow morning, you can give your reactions to Kevin's speech. So now Kevin will say his declaration about 8 minutes. So we listen to him. I will not come back. And then you will enjoy entirely freely the rest of this dinner. Merci beaucoup. Et maintenant, la parole est à Kevin Rudd.
Well, greetings, everybody. It's Kevin Rudd. I'm speaking to you from Washington, D.C. I'm so sorry I can't join you live. I'm so sorry I can't join you in the flesh at this most recent IFRI conference. But to my good friend Thierry Montbrial, greetings from Australia. Well, Washington, D.C. is Australia anyway. Thierry's asked me to address 3 questions, which I'll try to do as succinctly as possible. The first is, what major changes have we seen in China's domestic political economy since IFRI met as a conference 12 months ago in November of 2023? Secondly, what are the likely contours of China's own strategic and policy response to the election of President Trump for a second term? And thirdly, the likely contours of US strategic response to China, given the election of Trump as well. I'll do my best to answer these in 5 or 10 minutes, and we'll leave it at that. On number 1, what has unfolded in China's own domestic political economy over the last 12 months? I think the important thing to emphasize here is the economy, the economy, and the economy. All of you in the business community will know that China's economic growth performance has been softening significantly, not just over the last 12 months, but really over the last 24 months. It'll be remembered that 2 years ago, when China first emerged from the zero COVID environment, that it was expected that Chinese economic growth would come roaring back. Well, it hasn't. There are a number of manifestations of that. Firstly, weak consumer demand. Secondly, weak levels of business confidence reflected in weak levels of private fixed capital investment. Thirdly, on top of that, we've had a radical downturn in the Chinese real estate and property market, which of itself represents some 28% of GDP and the principal vehicle for personal savings and investment in the PRC. Fourthly, what we've seen also is only small growth in public investment because there are ultimately constraints in terms of China's fiscal capacity. Fifthly, therefore, the main driver of economic growth these days continues to be net exports. Therefore, what we've seen around the world is great pressure being placed on global markets as China seeks to undercut international competitors around the world in order to boost its net export earnings back into the economy. In fact, one of the few areas which is registering positive growth for China's economy at present is the net export sector. Put all these factors together and you get some sense of the underlying dimensions of the domestic economic challenge. So what has been the Chinese government's policy response to this? Well, so far we've seen no fundamental change in the strategic direction of Xi Jinping's effort to reassert the centrality of the party over the market, reassert the centrality of state-owned enterprises over private enterprises, and to reassert the central importance of common prosperity over unequal income distribution. The consequence of all the above has been the private sector, once this enormous generator of economic activity in China, has been in relative retreat. And that has continued. And we see so far no real correction against that underlying ideological direction for the party, going right back to when Xi changed ideological course prior to COVID, in fact, from the 19th Party Congress way back in 2017. So secondly, what has Xi Jinping and his economic team done instead? They've tried to deal with the declining growth problem, the rising unemployment problem, and the rising youth unemployment problem, and static living standards problem by a combination of fiscal and monetary policy stimulus. However, there has been a limitation so far in terms of the size of the fiscal and monetary policy loosening that will be undertaken in order to fill the growth gap. We will see what the detail is emerging from the Central Economic Work Conference of the party, whose communique has literally only been released today, and a little too soon for us to properly evaluate. But we should expect some overall loosening of fiscal and monetary policy, some, therefore, injection of additional economic activity as a result of that. But as we all know from stimulus strategies, they are by definition short-term, not long-term. They are cyclical rather than being structural. And the underlying policy problem here for the Chinese economy is a structural one. Therefore, as you emerge into 2025 and the inauguration of the Trump administration on the 20th of January, China emerges with an economy which has been underperforming, a Chinese economy which over the last 3 years has actually represented a declining proportion of the global economy rather than a continuing growth in China's significance as a global economic actor. On the broader front, which is the political and military and security front, we also have seen over the last 12 months, since IFRI was last convened, an effort on the part of the Chinese government under Xi Jinping and the Biden administration to stabilize the geopolitical relationship. In part, that's been a reflection of underlying weakness in China's domestic economic conditions. But in addition to that, China has also sought to stabilize its geopolitical relations more broadly with third countries and other regions, including Europe, including Australia, including various other parts of the world. We saw this brought to the head at the Biden-Xi Jinping summit at Woodside near San Francisco on the margins of the APEC summit in November last year. So therefore, during the course of 2024, what we've seen is a decrease in the level of direct military-to-military friction between the US and China. We've seen an increase in the regularity of military dialogue between the Chinese and US militaries. We've also seen the initiation of US-China dialogues on the question of artificial intelligence. There have been some other reopenings of political channels of communication as well. So this has been all part of a stabilization compact. The open question, however, is what will happen now into the future under Trump 2.0. I think we should just bear the following factors in mind. The incoming Trump administration contains within it a range of individuals who have had a long-standing hardline policy towards the Chinese Communist Party. Therefore, in reconciling America's long-term economic objectives under the Trump administration against a weakening Chinese economy on the one hand, and against the national security environment which I just described, is at present an open question in terms of which way President Trump and his team will go. The final question I said I would address is how about viewing this relationship, that is the future of the US-China relationship, from the Beijing perspective as we embark upon the period ahead under Trump 2.0. My experience of the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese governments over 40 years or more now is that the historical pattern will always be for the Chinese system to spend a lot of time during the course of the first year of any new US administration analysing that administration for real-world change in policy actions and behaviour. In other words, they don't simply take a press statement as indicating where in fact US policy will now lie in the future. They will observe what happens on the ground, economically, militarily, and technologically, in terms of the increasingly vast array of limitations and bans on US high technology exports to China. That will occur, in my judgment, during the course of 2025. The second point, however, is this. President Trump has already indicated in the pre-election period that he would proceed with imposing a 60% tariff on Chinese goods. This is a significant tariff. If he proceeds with the announcement of that tariff and the implementation of that tariff, the open question for the Chinese system is how do they respond? Do they see this and conclude that this is an invitation to a negotiation? Or on the other hand, do they see this as something requiring an immediate set of retaliatory actions themselves? And the implications which that has in turn for the overall global trading environment and overall global economic growth. These are open questions for the future. So Thierry, I hope these three sets of reflections are of some use in your deliberations at IFRI this year. As I said, in China's domestic political economy, it has been the question of how to restore economic growth through stimulus rather than fundamental policy change, which, as you know, can be a very difficult objective to achieve. Secondly, the Chinese system itself, under normal circumstances, will spend at least 12 months examining the nature of the incoming Trump administration, although the caveat there is what happens in the immediate term as far as China's reaction to tariff announcements by President Trump and his team immediately following January 20 in the inauguration. And thirdly, more broadly, in terms of Trump's own strategy towards China, where does that land as they seek to reconcile President Trump's stated economic objectives in his national policy document released during the Republican National Convention for the United States to prevail in its long-term strategic economic competition with the People's Republic of China? And how is that reconciled also with the continuing national security concerns in and around Taiwan? I hope that's been of some use. All the best to you all.